Time to punch in.
That's right. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. As always, I am Brian Ward, and I am joined by...
Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
Hello, Andrea.
Hello.
We are back with another excellent episode of the Arkham Sessions. This one is dealing with the episode Fear of Victory. And surprisingly, there's quite a little bit to talk about in this episode, so I'm very excited.
Yes, this is another episode featuring the Scarecrow. So of course we're going to be talking about phobias and anxiety.
Which is always a couple of topics that you love to
I do,
cover.
yes.
And just for folks who haven't necessarily gone back and listened to the third episode, Nothing to Fear, you actually have a little bit of a history with dealing with phobias in a sort of clinic environment or lab environment.
Yes, I used to work at a university lab that focused primarily on anxiety and phobias. Yeah, that was a great episode because we got a chance to talk about the clinical trials and the lab experiments that deal with anxiety disorders and phobias. And if you haven't already listened to that one, go back after this and listen to it. I think it's one of my favorites.
It's a good introduction to the Scarecrow, and this one picks up quite nicely, I think.
Absolutely.
So let's get to the episode. It was written by Samuel Warren Joseph, and it was directed by Dick Sebast, and it aired September 29th, 1992. We open up learning that a lot of the star athletes, of which they apparently have at least one in every sport, is suddenly falling in the prime of a game or a match. They've got a boxer that is suddenly terrified to fight in the ring. There's a tennis player who is suddenly terrified to play tennis on the court. And we then go to Gotham State University, where a telegram is being delivered to room 307 of Wilson Dorm, where we meet star quarterback Brian Rogers and his roommate, Dick Grayson. This is the first time we've seen Dick since the second episode, Christmas with the Joker.
Absolutely.
And so now
we
know now where Robin has been all this time.
He's been at college.
He's been away at college. We had no idea.
But he's not in any one of these athletic teams. What does the telegram say?
It's one of those things that sort of, as we've learned with Batman the Animated Series, they sort of play with time periods a little bit. We're never quite sure where Batman is in the timeline. So here we actually have the use of a telegram, which is something that we don't see very often anymore. And the messenger drops it off. Brian gets it. Dick Grayson reads it. What does it say?
Dear Brian, best of luck against Tech, and remember that only a fool knows no fear. I'm betting on it. A fan.
What does that mean? When you heard that, what did that mean to you?
Well, it was definitely a riddle, and it was definitely something that when you're an athlete, people are constantly trying to get into your head, trying to instill some bit of doubt on the field or in the ring or on the court. And you just try to play with that person's head. And of course, it was foreshadowing. There was something up with this telegram, but we don't know that yet. We simply know that he has received this mysterious message. It has a bit of a riddle in its text, and then he goes off and plays the game. And he, like the other players, breaks down. He is terrified. He begins to hallucinate and see the other team as monsters. They are all coming after him, and he absolutely cannot perform. So this obviously concerns Dick, and he goes to his old friend, Batman, and informs him that something must be wrong because this is very much not in Brian Rogers' personality. He's not the type to crack under this sort of pressure. He is the star quarterback. He thrives in this situation. Batman is willing to sort of write it off as sometimes people have bad games.
I thought that was great, actually, because, when he said that his friend had essentially had a panic attack on the football field and was underperforming and was even taken to the infirmary for observation, Batman's response was,
"He was under a lot of pressure, Robin."
I don't know. I thought that was cool how he was normalizing that situation and saying even star athletes, even folks who are successful and have everything together may have a bad day and may be prone to stress and anxiety in this way.
Now, this becomes concerning when that night Batman and Robin are out to foil a jewel heist, and suddenly Robin becomes terrified of heights. Now, this is uncommon because if you know Robin, if you know Dick Grayson, you know he is a member of the Flying Graysons, formerly a circus performer specializing in tightrope walking and aerial acrobatics.
Right.
This is not the kind of situation where Robin would be scared, but he is terrified. And Batman is nearly killed in the process of trying to stop this jewel robbery, and Robin's simply too scared to help.
It should really have been one of his easy takedowns. I mean, there's two robbers at the top of the building. They're just taking jewelry. It's a low risk crime. And you're right. Robin he's so terrified. He's basically incapacitated. And Batman's life was at risk. Robin wasn't there to assist him. And he even, in that scene, Robin says,
I don't know what happened to me. I was scared to death. I couldn't even think.
So let's talk about that a little bit. To me, it sounds a bit like a panic attack.
Yeah, and actually Batman says, both you and your roommate had panic attacks.
Yeah, within a week of each other. This is when Batman starts to jump on board with this idea that there's actually something going on.
Yeah.
And he wants to investigate further. Drea, for folks that don't know or haven't experienced one, describe a panic attack.
Well, most people have actually had a panic attack at some point in their lives. Very few people have never experienced this to some degree. But a panic attack is basically a sudden onslaught of physiological anxiety symptoms. That could include anything from heart racing, feeling shaky, feeling dizzy, sweating, feeling like you're choking or you can't breathe, feeling nauseous, even feeling sick to your stomach, or that you might be sick.
Right.
Shortness of breath, chest pain, or that your chest is very heavy, numbness or tingling, usually in your fingertips, your toes, feeling either really, really hot all of a sudden or very, very cold. Sometimes people will say, like, I felt like the blood was rushing, either to my face or away from my face.
Right.
There are additional interesting feelings of what's called depersonalization, or that you're basically in this state of unreality. You feel like you're outside of your body, or you feel that you're having a break from reality. That part is actually really disturbing.
Gotcha.
And then some people, because of these co-occurring multiple sudden symptoms, can even feel like this means I'm going to die, or this means I'm dying. My body's basically giving up.
Right.
And a lot of folks that I've worked with have said they feel like they're having a heart attack. They actually think that their heart's racing so fast that it's stopped functioning correctly, and they're having some kind of heart failure. And as you can imagine, those thoughts just create more anxiety and ultimately increase and heighten some of those feelings, some of those physiological symptoms I just mentioned, which, may even increase the intensity of the panic attack. So the good news about a panic attack, usually they're very short-lived. Basically, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, they're under a minute. we usually will reassure people who are suffering from panic attacks or scared to have panic attacks that your body can't be in that state for very long. It ultimately recovers. And your body is actually, it's built to recover from those feelings. And many people have heard of something called fight or flight. That what's happening is your body's gearing up to either fight or get the heck out of there. So all of those symptoms that I just mentioned are actually quite adaptive and normal if you're in a very dangerous situation.
Right.
So the good news is that you won't stay in that sense, in that panic state for long. Your body will recover from it.
Is it determined? Has it been determined? Because typically, if you are in a situation where there is fight or flight involved, you're walking down an alley and suddenly you see the Batman, or you see something. There's a reason for this fight or flight reaction. But panic attacks have a tendency to just sort of come on for no apparent reason.
Well,
or at least none that is immediately present. Do we know what causes a panic attack?
Well, that's a great question, because usually people will say it came on all of a sudden. I had no ability to predict this.
Right.
And in fact, when you look at the DSM or the manual for mental health disorders, one of the criteria is that it is a sudden unexpected panic attack. So if it happens every time you're seeing snakes or that you're in front of a snake,
that's not really a panic attack then.
Well, it is a panic attack. But it's not what you're talking about, which is sort of this this disabling panic disorder. I think that's probably a better explanation of what you're talking about.
Gotcha.
Whereas if you have a panic attack and it's because you're in an elevator or you're walking across a very high bridge or you're on a plane or you're in front of a room full of, hundreds of people or something and you're about to say a speech, that's not necessarily unexpected or out of the blue. That's because you have a fear of that particular situation. And if it's disabling enough, we would say that you have a phobia. You have a simple phobia or a specific phobia.
Right.
Now, you mentioned unexpected panic attacks. If somebody truly feels like they're coming out of the blue and they can't predict them, that's a criterion for panic disorder. But, looking at, let's draw back to this episode here. Robin and his roommate were in specific situations that drew out this panic attack.
Right.
And that's actually exactly what Batman wanted to explore in their little animal experiments that they conducted.
Which we can certainly talk about now. And it's a little, to be honest, troubling for me a little. I don't know why, but suddenly Batman, we go back to the dorm room. Batman comes across the telegram, sees that there's a residue on it. That residue is clearly some sort of toxin. Batman goes back to the lab at the Batcave, runs some tests, does some investigating, and finds that the residue is actually something that seeps into the skin, and the fear element is triggered by adrenaline. So as Brian is getting pumped up during the game and is playing his heart out, what he's actually doing is triggering this fear effect. So instead of excelling on the football field like he usually does, he is now terrified of the other players. By the way, this is another example of where Batman the Animated Series is sort of trying to give us an idea as to what time period it's in. We talked about the telegram.
Right.
The players are all wearing leather helmets. Leather helmets haven't been around in football really since the 30s. When Rydell introduced plastic helmets, but certainly since the 50s. So, by the 50s, everyone was wearing plastic helmets.
Okay.
So this universe is certainly playing with time periods, and we're actually sort of dating this football team as being sometime at least in the 30s.
Well, they send telegrams, but they read Tiny Toon Adventures.
That's true. It is a very weird universe
It's not weird. I would love to be in this universe.
Well, no. I would hate to live in this universe
Well, you're
where the
ginger.
gingers are always the bad guys or the weaklings. I would
not
hate to live
survive.
in this universe.
Take it easy, fella.
So during these experiments, we learned that Batman actually has a collection of animals, cats in cages that he is testing the fear toxin on. He puts the toxin on, determines that it is seeped into the skin. He then puts a mouse into the cage with the cat. The cat arches its back in that getting ready to attack response. And then that's when suddenly the cat is terrified of the mouse.
Yeah, like a switch.
Right.
Goes from being angry and territorial to fearful, and then even kind of curls up and starts meowing.
Yeah. So now Batman is testing on animals.
I think that he's not harming them. He's
Well, he's certainly inducing fear.
well, but that's not necessarily there isn't any harm in that's actually
Be careful, because Jonathan Crane got kicked
I
out.
know.
Kicked out of the university
I
for this.
I was about to say it's not unlike many experiments about anxiety and phobias back in the day, where experimenters would be interested in the amygdala, the part of the brain that is responsible for managing fear and anxiety. And so experimenters would tamper with that part of the brain in various animals, including cats,
Right.
to test that response and see how intense that fear response is or how absent that fear response is, given what they did to the brain of those animals. So
I really want to know if Batman rounded up a bunch of cats specifically for this, or if he has some that he happens to use for testing on a regular
he
basis.
just has like an animal testing center.
Or if he had a mouse and was like, what could I use with it? I need a cat, rather than use, I don't know, a chimp or,
Yeah.
some other type of, like, Batman's just got a collection of
For some
cats.
reason, this does not bother me. I am absolutely not in favor of hurting animals. I certainly am I question a lot of animal experimentation, but there was something about his...
When Batman does it, it's okay.
No, it's like he's a scientist and he wants to discover, the basis of this toxin. And so he uses basic emotional regulation from animals, because that's a controlled way to figure out what's going on. And I didn't get the sense that he was harming them. And maybe I'm hoping that what he does is he lets them free,
Right.
and he cleans off the toxin or something. Now, we know that there doesn't seem to be an antidote yet to this.
Yeah, they don't
stuff.
know how long it'll last. They need to find out, and it's during this process that Batman certainly comes to the conclusion that there's only one person that could have this sort of fear toxin, and that is, of course, Jonathan Crane, the Scarecrow. So they go off looking for the Scarecrow, who is presumably still in Arkham, where they had left him before. And here we see that there are some of our former patients.
The best scene of the episode is him walking through Arkham.
He walks down the corridor and we see the Joker in his cell. We see, with playing cards. We see Poison Ivy in her cell with a potted plant. We see Two-Face flipping the coin.
As he does.
So, for starters, I'm a little concerned that everyone just lets these people have these things. It seems to me that if you took away Two-Face's coin, you would take away his ability to make choices, such as, do I try to escape or do I not? One flip of the coin. Take that away from him. Don't even let him ask the question. Don't give Joker playing cards. We've seen
that's just mean.
We have seen that the Joker has exploding playing cards.
Maybe
who gave him this deck?
Maybe they allowed him to have a deck that is safe. It's not used as a weapon.
I'm sorry. As we pointed out in the episode before, Be a Clown,
Yeah.
Ricky Jay uses regular playing cards as weapons.
And he can slice watermelon.
He can slice watermelons. You do not give the Joker
But you
playing
just
cards.
said it. You said if you take away the coin from Harvey Dent, Two-Face, you take away his ability to make choices. Now,
Well, what choices does he have to make?
I'm
He's
just
in a
saying,
cell.
you've just pointed out that if you took those things away, it's not humane.
We certainly know that Poison Ivy has the ability to manipulate plants. So I definitely wouldn't give her a plant.
Maybe the plant she has is some kind of very safe, tame,
Right.
And
they're also wearing their costumes. They're not in like jumpsuits
why
or
can't
anything
you
like
just
that.
let them be themselves?
I'm just saying, like, this is why they escape.
I have no
This is
problem
why
with
Batman
it.
is so busy. The people in Arkham. Now, I do have a question, though, and this is a very serious question. When we last saw Poison Ivy at the end of Pretty Poison, she was being taken away to Stonegate Penitentiary.
Right.
As a psychologist, what has to happen at Stonegate for Poison Ivy to then be transferred to Arkham Asylum?
Mm-hmm. Well, if we think about Arkham Asylum as the place where what do they call them? The criminally insane go.
Right.
Which I think translates to people who have broken the law, who have some kind of diagnosable mental condition or
Yeah.
need some kind of mental health intervention and are not suited for just simply being incarcerated in a penitentiary in your typical prison.
But didn't we kind of determine that Poison Ivy...
If I remember correctly, we were discussing the possibility of borderline personality disorder, I
Right.
believe.
Right.
And we were talking about her ability to use sensuality
Yeah.
and her femaleness to kind of manipulate other people.
But would that land her in Arkham Asylum?
Well, the behaviors that would land someone in Arkham Asylum
Mm-hmm.
would have to be ones that present themselves in such a way that it's clear that their decision making, their behaviors, their emotional regulation, their ability or inability to adapt, those kinds of things are influenced by some kind of abnormal psychology, some kind of mental health illness that warrants particular intervention or a different type of rehabilitation, let's say.
Right.
So I even think the idea that they're in Arkham is providing them with this, I don't want to call it specialized treatment, but perhaps specific intervention that will hopefully allow them to recover or rehabilitate and even get out.
Right.
I don't necessarily see that for some of these other places, Stonewall, Stonegate, Blackgate, whatever you want to call them.
Right.
So
That's fair.
then they get out. I mean, maybe they get out because they're deemed functioning. They're deemed as having functional psychology again, and they are released.
And sometimes they get out because they're given potted plants, coins, and playing cards.
Maybe.
But we go down to the end of the corridor where Jonathan Crane is supposed to be, and we come across a guard who
He's
clearly...
reading Tiny Toons. No.
No.
He's
but
the one guard who doesn't read Tiny
He's the one, yeah. Food is delivered to Dr. Crane's cell, and this guy dumps it. Now, my first instinct is the guy's just being a jerk. He is keeping the food from Dr. Crane. Batman, he's more hip to this. He believes that Crane isn't in the cell.
Right.
And he asks the guard. The guard insists that he is, but clearly something is up. So Batman insists on seeing the cell, goes in there, and of course we find the Scarecrow is gone. And this corrupt guard knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Scarecrow's gone. Gotta go find him. We then cut to Gotham Square, and here we find a disguised man who is on a winning streak.
I ain't seen you lose. Not even once over the last week.
And Leon the Bookie sends his thug, by the way, played by Tim Curry, who we know was originally cast as the Joker, and then replaced, of course, by Mark Hamill. It's good to know, though, that they kept bringing him back in anyway to voice people. The thug goes off to follow this mystery lucky gentleman, and sort of shake him down, figure out how it is that he is not losing. But Jonathan Crane is ready for him. And he drugs the guy, terrifies him, and there we see for the first time, when he pulls off the disguise, his full Scarecrow regalia. And it's new. It's not the same Scarecrow that we saw in Nothing to Fear. This one is a much more terrifying face. Before, he was...
he looked just like a sack.
Yeah, it was very like almost sock puppety. It really wasn't terrifying, and his voice was different.
Yeah,
he had a much more sort of sophisticated, almost professorial address in the way that he spoke. He spoke like someone who was an educator, and here he has gone more toward the scary side, both physically and with his voice and his persona.
Well, he still talks down to the guy, and I find it interesting. Does. They still kept his... He thinks he's superior to everyone, and believes that he is just vastly more intelligent than anyone he deals with. So this...
And he may be.
He may be.
Certainly more than this thug.
You have that bewildered look. But your sort always does.
Just this very condescending, demeaning, superior kind of talk. And I think that's bright. I think that writing is makes sense because his background is such that he felt he was so right and he was so, I guess, intelligent and equipped to carry out these scientific experiments at the university that when he was let go and when his funding was pulled, it was a huge blow to his ego. So that overcompensation is maintained in his persona.
Now, how would you classify Crane now versus then? This is the second time we've seen him. Before, he seemed to be a guy on a mission. It was more revenge driven for having kicked him out. At the time, we had said that his experimentation, while not necessarily ethical, wasn't necessarily disorder driven. He didn't have a particular disorder that drove him to research fear. But here... he seems to be, he even mentions later that he is winning all of this money to fund the chemicals to create the fear toxin in order to drive everybody in Gotham mad.
Yeah.
That sounds like a different character a little bit.
That sounds like the Joker, frankly.
Yeah.
That sounds like something he would do. He wants, and so now, but we did say, remember in his experimentation at the university, he very much enjoyed terrorizing people.
Right.
He was so interested in the process of fear that he wanted to just fully experience other people being horrified by his hand. So I think that element is still there. But there's this interesting turn here where it's, I don't know, it's more about the power of being able to do this now versus the experiencing people's fear.
And now he's both physically and he's physically twisted. He looks
weird.
I will say though that I seem to remember at the end of Nothing to Fear, and this goes back to the point of why did they let these people have their costumes and all of that. Maybe I've got to go back and look, but at the end of Nothing to Fear, he's not wearing his costume. He is without the mask or anything, and they throw him into the cell where they then make him scared. They throw a little bit of his own.
Yes, you're right.
So at some point in time, they gave him his Scarecrow costume back. They're like, again, here, why don't you take this in a rocking chair?
Maybe he showed that he was able, if he had some of the basic fundamental parts of his these are parts of their personality.
I would not but these are personalities that have landed them in Arkham Asylum. I would not give them these parts of their personalities. It's a cartoon.
Is it?
Maybe. Where do we go from here?
Well, we keep talking about the Scarecrow, but this episode for me is really about Dick Grayson.
Yeah.
And what happens to him because he's exposed to this fear toxin.
Well, that's an excellent point. We go back to the Batcave, where Robin is specifically trying to get over his fear of heights himself. He is sort of administering his own treatment. Mm-hmm. Drea, talk a little bit about that and overcoming that fear that he now has.
I think it's a great scene. We see him really struggling, actually. He's terrified, and he's just walking across. It looks like this is
It's like a plank or a cave.
some kind of catwalk in the Batcave,
Yeah.
let's say. And he's actually talking to himself.
Steady, Dick. You can do it. No! I'm not afraid. Not afraid.
We're seeing him face his fear by going into what would normally for him be a routine situation. Actually,
He even mentions, I learned to walk on a tightrope.
Right. He mentions that this kind of thing should be a piece of cake for him.
Yeah.
So for him to feel absolute terror walking across this catwalk is, it's unfortunately unlike him. And it's, I think that it plays into some of his insecurities and some of his own fears about living up to the cape.
Right.
But ultimately, he's facing his fears and he's walking across the catwalk. And what's interesting here is that Batman tells him,
It's bound to wear off. But in the meantime, you've got to fight it. Regain control.
and he says this during a time that Dick is struggling with his motivation and his confidence that he can overcome this anxiety. Mm-hmm. And what I absolutely just loved was Batman's reassurance that, okay, this thing's going to wear off eventually, but you have got to overcome it yourself. You have to face this head on, and you have to get into the situation where you can practice feeling successful, feeling able, feeling this self-sufficiency, feeling like you can overcome this anxiety. Mm-hmm. And it won't happen unless you do it yourself.
Right.
And so that, I don't know, that whole statement of regaining control isn't, I don't know if you responded to this at all, but for me, that was incredibly meaningful and a very powerful scene. Mm-hmm. Because notice Batman didn't tell him, okay, just get in bed and it'll wear off.
Right.
He didn't tell him,
he specifically tells him to get into the Batmobile.
He said, I need you.
Yeah.
They're about to go on this mission, and Robin actually says, I better stay back because I'm a liability to you. I'm nowhere near where I'm supposed to be. I'm probably going to have a panic attack. Like, this isn't going to be good for you. And Batman tells him that he needs him.
Right.
And again, I just find that dialogue is exactly what you would have with somebody who's struggling with anxiety or with panic attacks and feels that sense of, I'm no good here. I can't do this. I'm unable to overcome this. That's the kind of conversation you have.
Yeah. So Batman takes Robin to a Gotham Knights football game and tells Robin that his job is to basically be a second set of eyes, to be a spotter looking for Crane. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, Robin finds Scarecrow in the crowd and then goes off to chase him down. We have learned that the quarterback for the Gotham Knights is receiving a telegram, and Batman actually intercepts that telegram. The quarterback clearly didn't receive it. Therefore, when he goes out onto the field, he still plays like the football god that he is. Now, I will say this, having been a high school and college football player myself, that man throws a weird football.
Why?
It does not spiral. It actually goes end over end, much like a kickoff.
Maybe that's his thing. Like, that's why he's so good.
No receiver wants to catch a ball that's going end over end like this. The animators seriously needed to figure out how to throw. In fact, very little animation would even need to happen. You just kind of have the ball go from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. You wouldn't even have to have it flipping. It was awful. But the receiver catches it.
Yeah.
Makes the quarterback look good, apparently. And that's happening. So Scarecrow can't figure out why the toxin hasn't kicked in.
Yeah.
He's now concerned about this. Batman, of course, finds him. There's a battle that ensues. The Scarecrow then takes out the toxin that could really throw everybody down in the stadium into chaos. And in order to ensure that he can get away and Batman will be busy taking care of everybody else, he actually drops the vial.
Yeah.
It lands on a platform below, and there is sort of a battle to see who can get to it. Can Batman get to it first and protect everyone, or can Scarecrow get to it first and ensure that everyone down below goes into a fearful rage? Meanwhile, Robin is trying to get over his fear.
Yeah.
And actually, as the vial falls, Robin swings across and saves the day by catching the vial. Robin, by the way, also helps save the day by intercepting the football helmet that the quarterback was supposed to wear.
Yeah.
That would have also had the toxin inside the football helmet. So the Scarecrow was going double duty on this guy, wanted to make sure that he won. And, Robin basically saves the day in both cases, catching the vial in midair.
Yeah.
And intercepting the football helmet.
And I want to clarify for folks who haven't seen this episode recently that it's not as if Robin suddenly switches back into this athletic, flying Grayson with no fears of heights. He is struggling. He's actually holding on to, a ladder or a rope, and he's contemplating. He knows, I've got to get over. I've got to swing over to catch this vial. He sees that this is his opportunity to basically take down the Scarecrow. But he's experiencing that beginning of the panic attack.
Right.
And we see that he's frightened and he's doubting himself.
But he does manage to conquer it. And he saves the day.
He does. And I think this episode ends with Batman saying, of course he congratulates him and he says, "Looks like you've got a handle on your problem."
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Which is another sort of really nice way to present this issue with panic attacks and anxiety and overcoming fear.
That they don't necessarily go away.
No, they don't.
He's still working on it.
Yeah, so obviously he's talking about the toxin. The toxin needs to wear off. So Robin has to gradually get over the anxiety and make sure he's putting himself out there and practicing being in situations that might induce that fear. But it exemplifies, toxin or not, it exemplifies that reality of overcoming fear in a successful way. In fact, if you avoid any fearful situations, if Robin were to go into his room and just shut out for days and wait for the toxin to end, well, that could have been an option he took. But by both saying he's still insecure and somewhat uncertain about his anxiety, and he knows he still has to experience some additional anxiety and face his fears in order to truly overcome these panic attacks, again, that's more realistic. That's exactly what he needs to do.
Right. So, and by the way, for those who are wondering if Brian Rogers got over his fear, we do see a little update at the end of the episode. Brian Rogers is drafted by the Gotham Knights football team. So Brian is going to do very well. But I am a little concerned about the time period in which this is taking place, because we saw that he was playing a football game, and then suddenly he's being drafted, which means the season is over. And we're like into, because, if he's in a college football team, let's just say he's gone as far as he can go in the season. Let's just say for giggles that game was the final game of the season. That would have been somewhere in like November. And now he's being drafted, and a draft takes place in like April and May. So Robin apparently has been suffering from these anxiety attacks for several months. Or if they want us to think that this all happened over the course of one weekend.
I don't know.
That Brian played a football game, did horribly, and then still got drafted by the Gotham Knights. I don't know. This is one of those situations where the writers just kind of throw things at you for no apparent reason.
I do not think that is really the point.
Well, it's not the point, but it happened. But it did happen in the episode, so we have to address it. Let's talk seriously, though, about these panic attacks. We talked a little bit about sort of what they look like and the fact that the body can't hold on to this for very long. But if you were going to treat someone with panic attacks, what sort of treatments does that look like? Or what does that treatment look like?
Yeah. Well, that's why I was very much praising how Robin was facing his fears, because treatment for panic attacks, or something called panic disorder, is exactly that. It involves, of course, a number of different types of skill building and techniques that someone will learn. But a huge component of interventions, psychosocial interventions for panic, is to gain control over those situations. So the first step is to understand what a panic attack for that person is like. Mm-hmm. So that's remember where we talked about like understanding your own anxiety?
Right.
That's exactly the first step. So what do my panic attacks look like? How do I know I'm having a panic attack? What first happens? What is triggering? Or what types of things trigger that panic attack? And then the second thing is to start to monitor those panic attacks, literally through a daily calendar, and to find out what time of the day those things are happening, what situations is it happening in. Now with Robin, it was always happening when he was in a particular situation. Mm-hmm. A huge component of understanding your own anxiety is the cognitive piece. And I say that because a panic attack is essentially your body believing that you're in this dangerous situation when really you're not. So with Robin, he's fully equipped to be able to handle those scenarios of, swinging across buildings and assisting Batman. So those are not life-threatening situations for him. Those panic attacks are, I want to say, they're in his mind. They're because he's gotten this irrational belief that he can't survive it, or that he's unable to succeed. So
but at some point in time, could that fear become, like, let's say the toxin wears off, but he still doubts himself. Mm-hmm. It's possible that he starts having natural panic attacks because he's been thrown off.
Yeah. Well, again, a huge component of that is reading those physiological signs. Mm-hmm. So once he experiences, okay, my heart's racing, I'm feeling a lump in my throat, I can't breathe, he's going to interpret that as something's wrong. Mm-hmm. I can't do this. I'm not going to survive. I'm in an alarmed state. That's basically what the body's telling him, is you're in an alarmed state. You are in danger. And so again, the treatment for that is to reframe that interpretation. You know what? I'm not in danger. I'm in a safe place. I'm doing something that I'm actually well trained to do. So it's that sort of rethinking about it. And in addition to that, it's a physical relaxation process that happens as well. So he would learn some breathing techniques, some muscle relaxation techniques, additional ways that he can calm the body. Bottom line, he is taking control of his anxiety and panic.
So where can someone go to learn more about panic attacks or this sort of problem?
There is a really great workbook that you can get online. It's called Mastery of Your Anxiety and Panic. And it's just a highly recommended, huge intervention, really well recognized by the field of psychology. in helping people take control of their anxiety and panic. And so I really recommend that book. And then online, actually, there's anxieties.com. And there are just a number of different self-help techniques and information, very similar to what we were talking about today, about how to recognize panic attacks and how to intervene so that you take control of your body and of your mind again, and so that you are no longer, I would say, dysfunctional because of your panic attacks.
So that's it for this week. Join us next week for a very special episode of the Arkham Sessions, where we'll actually take a step away from Batman the Animated Series for a week in order to celebrate the anniversary of Batman, the 1989 flick starring Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, Kim Basinger, directed by Tim Burton. This is our opportunity to sort of celebrate that release and maybe give you a different perspective, because as we mentioned in the very first episode of the Arkham Sessions, different writers, different directors, different storytellers will have a different take on these characters.
Right.
So will the Joker still have the exact same diagnosis? Will Bruce Wayne still have awkward reactions to Alfred or the people around him? We'll find out next week on the Arkham Sessions. Until then, follow us on Twitter. We are at Arkham Sessions.
I'm at Arkham Asylum Doc.
And I am at bward028. You can also email us. We are arkhamsessions@gmail.com. Or you could visit Drea's website, underthemaskonline.com. You can also come and find us and like us on Facebook. Lots of interactions. Really, anywhere you want to go, we're there somewhere. You can find us. Until next week, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And we are
the Arkham Sessions.